localize where it was. Is it in the right frontal lobe, which we find is a common area for ADHD and autism? Is it in the temporal lobe? Is it in the occipital lobe? All of these different areas. And then we actually want to stimulate that specific pathway or those specific pathways using the body and using the senses to actually build that healthier brain. And the interesting thing about this is that this is a permanent fix. This isn't temporary. So once you actually create and build those pathways, it's a permanent fix. It's not like a medication where it just wears off after it's done. We're actually creating a better brain over a period of time, giving the proper stimuli, which allows for that child to function in a much more balanced way. So let's talk about the right hemisphere of the brain. The right hemisphere is the brake pedal of the brain. It is responsible for appropriate withdrawal responses, stopping things, inhibiting movements or thoughts. So generally, most of your children that are going to have ADHD, what do? You know, they can't inhibit their emotions. They can't stop themselves. So they're blurting things out. They're acting impulsively. You know, they can't control their emotions. Sometimes they can't feel their own emotions. They can't feel their own body, which also creates problems in regards to movement. So they have problems with coordination and movement and balance. They have extremely poor muscle tone. They have delayed and poor motor skills, right? Poor rhythm and coordination. So all of these things are tied in with not having a strong right hemisphere. They can't inhibit themselves. They can't control their thoughts and movements. So the other interesting thing about the right hemisphere is that the right hemisphere of the brain controls or stops our sympathetic nervous system. Some of you have may heard of fight or flight. You know, if a bear is chasing us, what do? We basically run, right? We have we really are not concerned about, you know, digesting our food or having a bowel movement or, you know, being in that relaxation mode. We're just going to run, and that's what the sympathetic nervous system does. So the right hemisphere, when it's functioning and when it's strong, when it's there, it'll inhibit the sympathetic nervous system. When we have a weak right hemisphere, we then cannot stop our sympathetic nervous system. So our sympathetics are going to be on overdrive. So what do these children generally have? They're going to have problems with foods. They're going to have problems with digestion. They're going to have allergies, asthma. And what happens is it actually affects the gut. When we can't control those sympathetics, we can't make the proper digestive enzymes. We can't break down our food. So then what happens with our gut is it actually becomes open to infections such as, you know, parasites, yeast infections, bad bacterial infections, sensitivity with foods. So that's where the control of the brain can really affect the gut. So we know that we have to really look at the gut as well. But basically, we have to get that right hemisphere stronger so that it can actually inhibit the sympathetics. The other thing about the sympathetics is that the children are generally going to be very stressed, very tense, right? Because our sympathetic nervous system drives that. It makes us want to move. So that is another issue with that. Generally, a weak right hemisphere child is usually diagnosed as ADD again, ADHD, Asperger's syndrome, autistic, and OCD. If we look at the other side, the left hemisphere is the approach response. It's the gas pedal of the brain. It initiates thought, it initiates movement. So again, now, if we have a right weak hemisphere, our left hemisphere is going to be really strong, okay? So if our gas pedal is extremely strong and our brake pedal is weak, that child is just going to be all over the map, into things, you know, and all about themselves and really thinking about themselves only. So this area, this side, initiates thought and initiates movement. When it's weak, however, the child will appear more withdrawn, sad, or shy. And generally, these left hemispheric disorders are really going to show up when the child goes to school. They'll be generally slow to start speaking. They have a lot of processing disorders. They exhibit poor language skills. They have problems reading and spelling. They have problems academically, especially with math and they're not good with details. Weak left hemisphere children are frequently going to be diagnosed as learning disabled, dyslexic, or having reading, language disorders, processing disorders, and poor handwriting, because the left hemisphere is going to control those fine motor skills, whereas the right hemisphere controls the global postural tone of the body. So we see this occur, and we know that, these children are generally going to, even though they are not slow, but they appear as if they are. So it's really takes a real toll on their self-esteem. If we look at the left brain versus the right brain characteristics, the right brain is generally going to be formed in the first 2 years of life we talked about. That's where we really form the big picture of life. We actually form our ability to have nonverbal communication. So we start, the children start looking at the expression of the mother's face, whether they're smiling or laughing or, happy or that type of thing. Be able to communicate non-verbally with their parents. We form the ability to control large muscles, so large muscle movement. Their emotional IQ will form during the first 2 years of life. They'll actually form that emotional connection. Their ability to comprehend, or comprehension, is formed during the first 2 years of life, and that's when the right hemisphere develops. High frequency stimuli, low frequency sound forms. So, for example, the infant or the child will start, interpreting different sounds like, their heartbeat or the heartbeat of their mom, that type of thing. And also sense of taste and smell. Social skills and digestion will begin in the first 2 years of life. And we know that also their ability to have spatial awareness, so be able to recognize where their body is in space. We know that this is a big problem with children that have right hemispheric disorders. Generally, how I would describe it is that they feel as if their body is like this big mass floating in space. They don't feel, the sense of their body and where it is in space. So they generally tend to hit themselves, hit into things and fall, because they don't have that awareness or feeling. The left brain characteristics begin after the first 2 years of life, and that's where we start to develop our details, our ability to see details, verbal communication, small muscle control. IQ will begin to develop over this time. So that's why we're going to start to see more, academic issues with a left hemispheric disorder. So speech develops from motor and nonverbal communication patterns. Again, in the first 2 years of life, as the infant starts to develop a relationship with their parents, they're communicating through nonverbal cues, right? They're actually seeing what's right and what's wrong and what is the appropriate response at that age, so that they can actually see those nonverbal cues. And so that is where they learn how to develop, how to talk, and also being able to move actually helps develop those higher abilities to speak. Failure to develop through their primitive reflex and motor stages leads to the lack of speech and brain development. The right brain will actually map both sides of the body, and the left brain will map just the left as far as somatosensory or ability to feel your body. Sense of smell. Generally, we know that a lot of the children that have a right hemispheric imbalance or have been diagnosed with ADD or autism generally cannot smell very well. We know that also affects their ability to taste. So they have a lack of ability to taste, and therefore they don't have